about identity and culture, and through the lens of, I guess, my own, my own ways of explaining it. Now, first, I'll start off by saying this: there's an awareness of being a consciousness. Okay, so one could say that there's no identity in that state. That there's no, all labels, all symbolic representation, all that just sort of is, is ornamentation. It's a flowering of potentialities within a sort of general awareness. Okay, so I'll start off by saying that uh, everything else is probably going to be somewhat biographical and certainly just my opinion. But even the way I explained that initially, that's, you could say, it's my opinion. It's me trying to put a label on the experience of being alive, being sentient, and thus will always be a unsatisfactory encapsulation. Nonetheless, we live in a world of identity, and we live in a world of people who identify with things and subjects and that. So I'm Canadian, so I'm a subject of the crown. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a power they actually enforce. I have no idea. I may not even see it. I certainly don't look into it, and I don't read a lot of books to flesh it out. So I don't. I don't. It's not that I don't care. I don't notice it till it causes a problem. So I identify somewhat with my English and French heritage, somewhat. Okay. I also identify with the cultures that I've come to learn about in my life. I find a sort of commonality, and can see in my life how I mirror aspects of that. And in some ways, as I've gotten older, expressions of aspects of my personality have manifested, which I did not identify with when I was younger. Part of the way that I came to engage with that, or that flowered, and that I noticed that, and that I had a map and a language for explaining that, was my engagement with Tantra and Buddhism. Um, I find Buddhism, at least I guess what I've engaged with, or the philosophy of Buddhism, is very deconstructivist. So, analyzing the sort of stories that we get, the symbols that we get, and showing their emptiness. Now, you could say, well, that means they don't exist, or it shows that one's attachment to them is a product of conditions. You see, when you get in this language, it's like, well, there's nothing really to say about it. Uh, you know, Buddhist philosophers are some of the best philosophers, and as they engage, as people who've done a lot of deep practice engage with the world, it that will become clear that they'll just run roughshod over a lot of Western philosophy, and people can find in Western philosophy a lot of people who say similar things in their own language. Um, but also, there's a tendency for system building. There's a tendency to then go into language, go into symbolic representation in the effort, perhaps, or just the habit of trying to explain reality or navigate reality. But Buddhism has engaged with this for a very long time, and maps for the archetypes, which Carl Jung, made popular, though the word archetype existed before Carl Jung, and certainly the concepts and the ways that people engage with it existed before Carl Jung. But he wrote a lot, and created, you could call, lineages. You could call his students and the people who've continued on his philosophical tradition as a lineage. You could call it that. I prefer older views and pre-modern views. Um, Maybe because in that open space, I can allow my own creativity to flourish. Uh, so these are sort of things I identify with. Things I identify as a Canadian, and that I live in Canada. I could say that. I don't know what that means, and the more I look into it, the more it dissolves. I can say I identify as a subject of the crown, but again, I don't know what that means, and it's too complicated for even the crown to probably to know what it means. They can make statements, of course. They could stand in front of an audience and make very profound statements about the kingdom and things like that, or being a citizen if you're an American or some other country where they have citizens as opposed to subjects. So I mean, you can make all kinds of very flowery statements. Uh, so, but I don't know. I don't really know what that means on a practical level. I'm here. I'm sitting. I'm talking. Right. But to go for a walk. So, in terms of like my English heritage, even the ways that I navigate that have to do with symbols that I find sort of appealing. Uh, aspects of the English tradition which I found appealing, and most of those most of those are not really even uh, most English people would not identify with, and certainly don't reflect how English people are or live on a day to day basis. These are narratives, or the ones that I engage with are narratives of a culture, and everyone's engaging with a narrative in that culture. I find a lot of modern narratives quite. The word that came to mind was de-energizing. They seem to sap the energy, or like it's like listening to modern music. It's just so trash. You could make a lot with the culture, but by uh, by doing an analysis of music and the differences in music, but it's of course a reflective of how my energy, what I find empowering, what I find appealing. I hear music today. I was like, I don't know how this doesn't just make people all depressed, but it may be a reflection of a general depression, or it may be a reflection of a cynicism. I think there's a lot of there's not a lot of engagement with the deep aspects of the psyche, deep aspects of human nature. I think as a result of, not just so I be clear, I don't saying is a result of, as a result of having a recorded culture, and like it's because people record so much of their lives before because they're so concerned how they're perceived even on the internet, and certainly in public, and that's always been the case, right? But it's hyper focused now, right? And people are really superficial, you could say, in that way, or their image is more important than searching the depths, doing the work to go into the depths, which requires some distance from mundane society. Now, again, I said this has always been the case on a certain level, and you can go a lot into it. You go the rise of social media, the internet. Like I'm just going backwards here. Like the rise of social media, the internet, television, radio, journalism, books, the ways that people in a society limit people through their beliefs about how a person should live their life, about what narratives they should express throughout the course of their life, the timings for that. Like so, these are all things which are make a person who they are, but also one could argue limit them. Limit that capacity really to be present. Because this causes reactivity. This causes a perception of, well, you have an idea of how the other person's perceiving you, and thereby it kind of alters your way of expressing yourself, how you want to be perceived, the reactions from it. So this isn't a new thing, but I would argue that the interconnectivity of people, though good on some levels, and I wouldn't have engaged with a lot of cultures if I didn't have that access to that information, and I'm deeply appreciative for that. Though now I think you're seeing much more of a limitation, and a lot of people want to make this clear. I don't think these are original thoughts. These are not. These are the Buddha said this stuff too in his language at his time. This is just how a sort of a fairly common man, I don't know, explains it. Is this hyper focus now with social media, with limiting it and now with people attempting to control that. Now it's not new for people to try to control language or to try to control how people's behaviors. That's obviously not new. Of course, if you're a peasant or a farmer or whatever, like 1,000 years ago, some people may have all kinds of opinions, but it's not in your pocket. It's not on a phone in your pocket. It's like something someone says, and then you go about and live your life. And human beings lived that way for most of history. For instance, when they would say something, it would just go off the atmosphere, and then the people would have to interpret it. So they would have their interpretations, and and that's what was left was their interpretations, their memory of it, and that's how human beings evolved. So they didn't evolve with needing to have a hyper focus or a neurotic reactivity to the ways that they portrayed themselves. Some are more adept at that than others. Some are, like women have to be very concerned often with how they're perceived and have historically. That may be more natural to them. They that's a sort of, I call it a sort of soft power. It's not soft, but it's a sort of soft power because they have to navigate male psyches because men are a threat to women on some level, and also their ability to survive was somewhat dependent upon how they portrayed themselves to men. And that's not as much the case anymore, but still women have that capacity to navigate social life in that way. This causes them both. This is going to be an advantage, but also a cause of neuroses. And because they're policing each other, they're competing with each other. They police each other way more than than men police them. I know that's a controversial statement. Sometimes men's policing is more obvious, but women can be quite subtle in the ways that they police each other. This is, by the way, again, this is my own opinion, as I said to begin with, as a 40-something-year-old man. So if people disagree with it, that's fine. You have your own experience and you have your own ways of explaining things. And I say that because I don't pretend that I know the experience of being a woman. I could say, oh, well, maybe in my past lives, I've been a woman. My energy was at one time different, and then is reconstituted now within the context of the conditions that arose through the course of my life, my birth, and my physical makeup, and all this stuff. Okay, I could even have vivid memories of that, though I don't. But I could even have vivid memories of that from past lives. Okay, whatever. It's a memory. I have all sorts of memories. Does that tell me who I am right now? Right. And I have had experiences where it really seemed like, and weird occurrences too, where it really seemed like I had tapped into past lives, deep archetypal structures. They all passed. They're very interesting to me, and and it's certainly, I think it's made me more open minded, but like I obviously don't know the experience of being a woman when she goes to sit on a bus and men have their legs spread, and so they can't spread their legs on the bus. Like, I don't know that experience. It must be extremely okay. So anyway, where did I start? I won't go off on a tangent about that because I don't know. I really don't know. And they have their own reactions to society. Men have their reactions. Like, for instance, men are very concerned with women's behavior, and women go, "Well, why? Why?" Well, because it's in the blood. It's like it's worked into our system. Looking through that, dropping that, even when guys think they've dropped that and they're not, they that has the hope of not having that sort of I don't want to say the word prison, but that, I mean, I read once. I can't. And I wish I could quote the guy, but it was it was a Buddhist text, and it was karma is a woman. Karma is a woman. It's just 4 words. Karma is a woman. And to a man, and like these were written from male perspective, you can see that, like, their reactivity, self-consciousness, all these things can come about as a result of their engagement with women, which is a long history all the way back to the division of the sexes. And by the way, ignoring those energies, or pretending they don't exist, thinking that you've gotten through them, or that you understand them on a deep level, like I just keep getting proven wrong. So I don't think I'm a stupid guy, and I don't think I'm a guy without experience in life. So but the hope is obviously to drop it. And, when you're doing that kind of work, I think it's to be beyond it or transcend it or something. Now, if you're just in it, now you say, well, just be in it. Just be in it. Don't worry about it. It's a part of who you are, and it's as relevant as any other mode of behavior, you know, and equanimity, all this stuff. Well, that's not very skillful, you know. That's not really a skillful way to navigate life, because you can run into a whole lot of fucking trouble that way, and you'll end up with a lot of problems. And one way is to run away, of course, go to a monastery or something, or to the woods, and I guess that's one mode of operation. A lot of people don't have that option. They're navigating the sphere of daily life, and those are big deals to particularly to young men, and and it's also hard to see from the other person's perspective, and to take that into account, because you don't actually have the other person's perspective, and when you're in it, right? And I'm talking about even just very incidental. I was reading this guy talking about just his engagement with a waitress, like the self consciousness and his mind is running, and it was fascinating to me. And I was like, was I like that when I was a young man? And I'd say no, I wasn't like that. But like, I can certainly understand that. I can certainly understand, or I can. I cannot judge it. I can see it as a hopefully I can see it as a flowering of potentials and conditions, right? So anyway, these are some of my thoughts. So, uh, so where did this start? This started with me talking about identity. This started talking about identity, like my English identity, because it's part of my male line. Now that they weren't English for most of their history, they were Stone Age men, right? And and evolved under certain conditions that has external, more obvious, superficial results. I have blue eyes, ladies, and so those are what, step conditions, and who knows, maybe some particular male who was in the, you could trace your paternal line back to R1B or whatever, these kind of genetic mutations. But of course, those will have internal qualities as well, and they would have similarities with people who are of that same lineage, but also differences that are individual, cultural, you could say, conditional, that are particular to my life, my language, the symbolic representation, all sorts of things. And they would have similarities with people from other cultures, who were involved under different conditions, and there would be differences. And people are uncomfortable with talking about that, how those things manifest in the world. They would prefer to just say everybody is awareness. Hey, why don't you just look at your awareness? Why don't you just watch your... They would prefer that. And that's a noble goal. And if, but there's a reason, the reason people talk about, even that teaching, which is so important in a degenerate age, it seems to just evaporate. And you see control. People talk about a great awakening, and then they talk about the apocalypse. Maybe they're the same thing. I think those are narratives that seem actually, maybe, in fact, maybe they seem more real, particularly because they can be so widespread now. And thus you can have that shared narrative. It's all sorts of shared narratives. Many narratives will probably get changed as a result of AI, both in in the sense that it will change the way narratives are written. Also, it will change the way people maybe engage with narratives, because they will see emptiness of them and maybe start picking new ones. And some of these narratives that are very common in our culture, they have a history to them. They can seem really real, but it's because they have a history. One might argue. Um, so that's going to be a big deal probably going forward. But will you see it? Maybe, maybe not. Will you see those changes? Maybe, maybe not. Will you be able to talk across lines um, in that debate? Well, I mean, the very ways in which you talk on one side of the island or the other, um, you know, that affects your ability to understand at all. So it would seem unlikely that the kind of cross communication would happen. So those are some thoughts on identity. Now, this is predictive, in my view. This is predictive. It's not. I'm not saying these are good or bad things, or that someone should adopt my view. It's or that I wouldn't prefer that people could just rest in awareness and enjoy the sun. Old man basking in the sun. That'd be nice. That's a book by Keith Dowman, which I've never read, but the title is sufficient. So I've heard at one time. So that's a joke, esoteric joke. It's an inside joke. So yeah, it'd be great. That'd be great. But you see the world, you see patterns, you interpret things, and dropping the habit of interpretation is something that I have to do for myself. It's not something that I, really. I mean, could I teach it? Doesn't seem like I could. So, and even if someone agreed with everything I said, would that change their reactivity the next time they see someone they're attracted to or someone they hate? I don't know. It'd be great if that were the case, but but I don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. And anyway, I'm not the right guy to do it. People prefer authority, sadly, whether they're a priest or a scientist, or a journalist, or a writer of a book, or a guru. And that's another aspect of the psyche to engage with, your one's own engagement with authority, and how that can manifest in the world in good or bad ways, depending on your own value system. And instead, I'm going to take a walk. It's 4:20.